last night, as I was putting the finishing touches on my presentation, I decided to really get myself into the world race frame of mind, so I made ramen noodles for dinner. It was my first time eating ramen since being home. Along with oatmeal, I've been avoiding those things like the plague because I ate more ramen noodles on the world race than I did in college, believe it or not. Partly because we were in Asia for 8 months, but also because we're sometimes willing to sacrifice healthy food for a nice place to sleep without bed bugs. So you might be thinking, why am I talking about ramen noodles? But I guess after spending the last 3 months or so at home reflecting on my trip and retelling the same kind of mundane stories, I realized it's the small, seemingly unimportant things that end up helping to paint the best picture of my year. Because even though I was on a mission trip and I went to 17 different countries and did a lot of really cool things, it was still life and we were still just living day-to-day normal stuff and eating ramen noodles. So for any of you that don't know me, my name is Whitney Cragun and I'm a lifelong member here at Salem. In November, I returned home from a year-long missions trip called the World Race with Adventures in Missions. So I traveled across the 1040 window, which is a section of, the next slide will show, it's a section of North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, approximately between 10 degrees north and 40 degrees north latitude. So where you can see like this high saturation of red dots, that's the 1040 window, and the red dots stand for, each one is an individual people group, and the red color means that those are the unreached people groups, so people who have not heard the gospel or the gospel has not been brought to those places in a sustaining way. So either there hasn't been missionaries there or Christianity just hasn't spread there. It's sometimes called the resistance belt, because it includes the majority of the world's Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. There's approximately 4.95 billion people living there in that region, and 68% of those people are considered unreached, which is still over 3 billion people. So my world race route is called Expedition, and it kind of hones in on that specific area of the world and that specific need, in hopes of reaching more people and establishing more contacts in those countries, and eventually getting more missionaries there, hopefully to be able to share the gospel more. So this year was full of memories, lessons, and challenges of all kinds. I've been hemming and hawing for weeks, trying to decide what route to take, no pun intended, when talking about the journey I've been on this last year. At first I thought, well, I could start chronologically and talk about my preparation for the race. The next slide, I think, shows me with all my gear at the beginning. By the end of the year, I had kind of shed some things and didn't have quite as much stuff because I realized how much of a pain it was to carry it all around. So God had put the world race on my heart for a long time. It was several years before I finally applied, but it wasn't until that point that I was accepted that I started getting all the ducks in a row, and I quickly came to understand just how serious God was about me actually doing this thing. Because despite my nervous and hesitant and somewhat delayed start to fundraising and getting ready, in just a 2-month span of time, my family, my friends, you guys all helped me raise over $10,000 so that I could launch on the trip. And then funding continued to pour in as I was traveling as well. So to each and every one of you who have supported me in prayer and financially, thank you. I'm hoping that some of the stories I get to share today will get to outline just how much we were able to do this year. When I was trying to decide where to start, I thought, okay, well, I'll start off talking about provision. God provided finances, God provided a support in my family and in Salem in prayer. I could go on to talk about how God provided this amazing family for me throughout the year. So this is my squad at the Great Wall of China. So there was 21 of us in the beginning, and then when our leadership left, we were down to 14, which is just a really small squad for the World Race. Usually a typical squad is between 40 or 50 people. And so really we were such a tight-knit little family. And I think the hardest part about coming home has been kind of having separation anxiety from my people. So not only did God provide these people for me, who were the iron sharpening my iron all year, telling me when my sarcasm and bluntness had gone a little bit too far. There was also all the people that I met along the way that God provided. The experiences and the adventures were all part of that. So I could go down that route, but I would be talking for days, and that's without mentioning all the amazing food we ate and the places that we stayed and the crazy transportation that I took. So I figured as I kept writing, I'll go chronologically, and I'll describe my first month and go from there. So the next slide is a picture from when I was in Indonesia. So my team and I were in a city a few hours outside of the capital city of Jakarta. It was kind of up in the mountains. And we were actually working with displaced refugees from the Middle East. So we were in Indonesia, in their culture, but we were in this little pocket of the city that was, I think there was over 4,000 refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and many, many other countries. All of them unable to leave, really, until they got permission from the Indonesian government. And so they were stuck there. They couldn't work, they couldn't have jobs, they couldn't go to school. And so we were the first World Race team to go and to work with these contacts. And so basically we went into this school that the refugees had started there, just kind of out of boredom and out of the need for schooling for their kids in this community. So we went into the classrooms and kind of gave the teachers tips and tried to help where we could. I mean, there was one girl on my team who was an education major, but the rest of us, we had been to school, and so we tried to help where we could. But it didn't really feel like we had that much to offer in the end. We helped clean and prepare the building that we were staying in for a clinic that the Seventh-day Adventist Church put on, which was hugely successful, and we helped over 150 refugees get medical care that they needed. And the building would also go on to become another school shortly after we left, so we helped prepare it for that. But I fell asleep each night in Indonesia on my sleeping pad with mosquitoes buzzing in my ears, wondering how and what could I possibly do to really help these suffering people. Yeah, we could come in and we could, help them with their projects and do all these kind of surface level things, but it really just didn't feel like there was anything that we could really do. I learned a lot that month about mission work and about sharing Jesus with people. I learned that it's not always about building walls, and it's not about feeding people or clothing people all the time. Those are wonderful things. But that month in Indonesia, God put us right in the middle of a melting pot of Middle Eastern culture, simply to sit with these people and to be a light, to tell them that they are loved and seen by God. And that's just something that these people didn't have and had never really received. And it was such a humbling experience, truly, to leave that city and not really knowing what would happen to the seeds that we planted there. I think there's a few more pictures, from my time in Indonesia. So on the left is us having lunch with a bunch of the teachers at the school. I didn't know what Middle Eastern food was like before going to Indonesia. That's such like an oxymoron. But the food that they prepared for us was so good, you guys. They make this biryani chicken is what it's called, and it's like rice and chicken, and it's spicy, and it's so good. And they make the best bread. Anyway, and then the group on the right was some of the girls from the school that we really connected with during our time there. And then the last picture here is just, forgive my kind of wonky panorama picture. It's not very well done, but the rainbow's beautiful. And this is kind of what the terrain looked like in Indonesia with the mountains. And there was actually a volcano just kind of to the outside of this picture, in an active volcano. So anyway, after I got this first bit written down on paper about Indonesia, my dad offered up some unsolicited advice as I was kind of figuring out where to go from here. And he said, well, maybe I should just focus on a few important stories from the year, which doesn't make sense because I would be talking for days. But I timed myself, and I think I'm at like 8 minutes or 10 minutes or something right now. And so if I were to go on and talk about each country that I went to, we would be here for something like 2.5 hours. And I don't think you guys have time for that. So begrudgingly, I admitted to my dad that maybe I need to take a different approach. So I'm going to focus on some of the stories that really stand out to me from the year. So one thing, people always ask, what was your favorite month or what was your favorite country? And time again, I find myself saying Kyrgyzstan. So this next slide, I think, is a picture, some pictures from my time in Kyrgyzstan. And not only was it like an incredibly beautiful country that I didn't really know anything about before I went, there's mountains and rivers and just plush green, and there's huge watermelon fields. We were there in June, July, and there's watermelons are like their big crop. And so I don't know if I can eat watermelon for like 5 years because I ate so much watermelon. But yeah, it's just a beautiful country and beautiful people. The culture there is this Central Asian mixture of cultures, and yeah, really cool. But so we got to work with a family there in the southern part of the country in a city called Osh that pastored a church and ran a coffee shop, sort of cafe, as a part of their ministry. So we laughed a lot with them. We sang a lot with them. This is actually in Mongolia, if we want to flip back to the other slide. Yeah, this is Kyrgyzstan. So the top left picture is a picture of me and my teammate Casey in the middle, and then Nuriza on the right was our translator for a lot of the time where we were in Kyrgyzstan, and she is just amazing, such a gem. It's those people who like came into our lives by kind of happenstance. She was hired to be our translator. Or like in Mongolia, you'll hear me, I'll talk about the barista at the cafe. It's those were some of the close relationships that we formed this year. But in Kyrgyzstan, we got to help this ministry put on 2 different camps. And so, it was summer. I was really bumming out on not being in Minnesota for summertime. I've never been gone during the summer ever. In all my travels, I've been up at camp, or I've been obviously here at home. And so it was just like this little sweet treat that God gave me during the World Race to be able to be at camp in the summer. And we were on Issyk Lake, which is a famous lake in Kyrgyzstan. And I had I think 7 mini heart attacks just from all the kids swimming, and there wasn't any lifeguards. And I'm a certified lifeguard, so the whole week was just I don't think I actually swam ever because I was so terrified for the kids. But everybody made it, and we did well. But I'm going off script, you guys, I'm sorry. But yeah, these kids, my group is in the bottom right picture here, and I worked at Camp Hiawatha, Camp Vermilion for 5 summers, so somewhere around roughly 50 different weeks of kids. So, I've encountered a lot of energy and a lot of craziness. These kids blew them all out of the waters. Red Bull couldn't have given these kids more energy. I broke up fist fights between all these little 8-year-olds and but it wasn't, they were just so passionate and fiery about everything, but they were at the same time so sweet, and I think I gave more hugs that week than I gave in an entire summer at VLM. But the funny thing was none of those kids spoke any English, and so maybe it was just me. They knew they could get away with more things when I was the one supervising them, but no, they were fabulous, and it was such an amazing experience to be able to sing songs about Jesus with these kids who grew up, most of them are Muslim and grew up, in impoverished families, and coming to camp was kind of this one special thing they got to do during the year. So that was amazing to be a part of that, for sure. So the next slide is from Mongolia. I'm going to talk a little bit about my time there. So Mongolia is a Muslim country. The government there is somewhat unstable in that there's a changeover in the government every 2 years, and just depending upon what the leadership wants the religion to be, it changes very frequently, which is kind of odd. But when we were there, the church was being very persecuted and it was dangerous for the Christians in the little town that we were in. And so that was something that was extremely eye-opening to me, being from a place in the world where we can come to church on Sunday and come to church any day that we want to and talk to anybody on the street about our faith and not have to worry about our safety or our family's safety. We were in this little town called Olgi in western Mongolia. It took us like 2.5 days on a bus, going across the Gobi Desert just to get there. We were a large group of American tourists, so of course we stuck out like sore thumbs there. So we had to be very careful when associating ourselves with the Christians. But still we were able to gather in secret in the homes of some of the church members, and we were able to worship together, and we got to teach some English lessons and just simply break bread together and share meals. And so Mongolia, this is where we got to know a barista. Her name was Melody at the local coffee shop where we frequented, of course. And after a few weeks of getting to know her and just hanging out with her, she was very open, and her and her mom had been exposed to the gospel, and they, I think, were for a period of time were attending Christian church and stuff like that. And so she was kind of one of those, millennials, I guess, but it's different when you're not in America. She was kind of searching and looking, and so we just saw her as somebody we could really pour into and really try to build a relationship with. Well, it turned out she was the one who ended up inviting us to come stay with her family in the mountains. And so her family was from part of the Tuvan people, which is a nomadic people group in Mongolia, and these people still live. They live in their gers, or their yurts, ger in Mongolian, and they have yaks and goats and sheep, and they herd, and they make all of their own cheese and all their food. They make it themselves. And it was just such an amazing experience to go and stay with them. The woman in the front in the pink kind of dress was like the grandmother. They call her the woman of the ger. And then her husband is the man in kind of the gray and white striped jacket behind the little boy in white. And they were just the most hospitable people I have ever known. We, came bringing what little gifts we could bring them, and they served us food upon food upon food, some of the best tasting food I've had, or that I had in Central Asia, which honestly, the food in Central Asia is quite bland, so I can't say that was entirely hard, but it was delicious food, and we drank tons of milk tea, and we played games with them. They didn't speak any English, but Melody got to translate for us, and so that was just an incredible cultural experience to be a part of that. My teammates, Solomon, the guy on the far right, and then Eric, they actually wrestled. They Mongolian style wrestled the 15-year-old son, and there was a 15 and an 18-year-old, I think, and they both got their butts kicked, and it was so funny. These kids were so strong and so feisty. Obviously they wrangle their yaks all day long, I don't know. And so, just a lot of really fun memories there. I think there's a couple more pictures from Mongolia. Yeah, this was hiking up the mountain from their ger. We went up to the the spring or the headwaters where the river started, because it was like a holy place for them. And so we got to hike up there, and we were not prepared for this snowy hike. We were all wearing tennis shoes, and it was freezing. But it was beautiful, as you can see. I think the next picture is, this is the ger camp we got to stay at in Olgi. So there was kind of, instead of hostels or hotels, they had these ger camps. And so there was bunk beds in there, and we all bundled up. And it was a little bit chilly. We were there in May, I think. The months all blend together. So it was I think it was 30, 40 degrees at night, and it was pretty chilly. But it was a lot of fun. The family that runs this ger camp was a Kazakh family, which in Mongolia there's tons of Kazakh people that live there, and there's tons of Russian influence and Uzbek people, and it's kind of all because of the whole Mongolian Empire. Everything's kind of all over the place. But this family was absolutely amazing. They fed us so many meals, and we ate, I don't want to offend anyone, but we ate all kinds of different animal meat, and just got to experience a lot of cool stuff. Their kids would come and sing with us during worship when we would a couple of my teammates had guitars and whatnot, and so to hear them like singing songs about Jesus and getting to see us love each other and love their parents and serve people in the community just felt like such a privilege to be able to do that. So another huge part of my year was serving my squad as one of our logistics coordinators, and it would not be an accurate representation of my world race if I didn't talk about that, because it was a huge part of my year. So when I was asked if I would be willing to take on that role right before we launched last January, I had no idea what it would entail, but like a deer in the headlights, not knowing what was about to hit me, I said yes. So what does a world race logistics coordinator do, you might ask? Well, our role, myself and one other person on my team, his name was Sam, we're in charge of the logistics for a whole squad. So we planned all aspects of our squad travel. So for 21 people, that's not exactly easy. We bought our bus tickets, our train tickets, sometimes plane tickets. We negotiated all the taxi fares. We booked our hostels and hotels. We oversaw our visa applications and managed group border crossings. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. So the picture on the upper left was us crossing the border from Myanmar into Thailand, and they crammed us all into this tiny little office, and they're like, these visas are not the right visas, but they didn't say that in English, so it was a little bit harder to figure out what was going on, and I think we ended up having to pay them off to let us across the border, which is a normal thing in Asia. But yeah, the bottom left is another border crossing going into Laos, and then me on the right there, I look obviously very excited to finally be holding my Chinese visa in my hand, because, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. So our month 2, we went from Indonesia to Thailand, and I was so excited to be with just the girls of our squad. We split up, and we were going to be applying for our Chinese visas in Bangkok, where we were. And me being the logistics coordinator, I ended up having to spend pretty much the entire month going back and forth to the Chinese embassy, getting all of the visa stuff figured out, which I did not know that's what was going to happen. But yeah, I'm proud to say that all applications were successful and all the visas were granted, but God quickly used this accomplishment to deflate my pride a little bit. So when half of our squad ended up going to Cambodia instead of China, it was a little bit of a hit to my ego. But yeah, the half of us that did go to China, it was wonderful, but it was a really, really challenging experience. Chinese culture is just different than I mean, every country has its own unique culture, but China's like its own beast. And so it wasn't this like fairy tale Chinese experience like I thought it would be after finally getting the 10-year visa. So that was a lesson, my first lesson, I think, in kind of humbling myself to God's plans and not feel like, I guess, thinking that my plans were better. So. But now I'm getting sidetracked again. So then I thought I'd switch gears and tell you guys about some of the lessons that God taught me this year. That's another way I could frame this talk, right? So I came to realize kind of slowly, if you remember how my first month in Indonesia went, that the most powerful way to share the gospel with people was by letting them in on how the good news was playing out right then and there in our lives. So I got to share a little bit about my story with a girl I met in Bangkok while I was actually lost in trying to find my way to go pick up a package. So to condense a really long and actually really comical story, basically I needed a ride to the post office, and this girl offered to bring me there on her moped. So I don't know if you guys know anything about Bangkok or about Asia or about traffic there, but it is something else. Like close your eyes, heart-stopping, people are almost crashing into you every 5 seconds kind of traffic. And this was month 2. I was not quite used to this yet, but I really needed to get a ride to pick up this package. I think we were leaving the country in like a few days or something, and so I was like, I think at our training they even told us don't ever get on a moto taxi, they call them. Anyway, so I was like, I'm really gonna have to trust God on this one. But I took a leap of faith and I trusted her and I hopped on the back of her bike and I prayed. But it's still one of my favorite memories from the race. It's kind of like a mundane story, but I'm like sitting there on a moped with a complete stranger and I get to tell her, she was, kind of asking like, well, why are you so worried? Like, it's fine. I do this every day. And I was like, and I got to actually tell her a little bit about my story. And I told her about the accident that I was in 5 years ago now. And it was like such a freeing moment for me to be able to share such a scary and hard part of my past with a complete stranger who was actually like helping bring healing to that situation. Little did she know. Just to be able to share with her my faith in Jesus and how he has restored and healed so many things in my life was just like, who would have thought that would have happened on the back of a moto taxi in Bangkok. I'm still Facebook friends with her, and we kind of stay in touch a little bit. Her English was not super great, so I like to think that the Holy Spirit was like intervening to make sure that she was hearing the bits and pieces of my story. That was just one of those situations where it really is the person sitting next to you. It's not all those millions of people in the city of Bangkok that you really can make an impact on. And miraculously, God uses those situations to deepen our trust in him and our intimacy with him as well. So another lesson I learned on the world race, don't put new wine in old wineskins. I already knew that one. But similarly, I learned, don't try to hike 300 miles in year-old running shoes. It's kind of the same thing. So I debated putting up some gross pictures of the blisters I had on my feet, but I thought I'd spare those of you who might be a little more squeamish. But I'm telling you guys, there was not like one part of my toes that was not a blister. It was so bad. So my team and I were we were hiking the Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James, in Spain. Well, it starts in St. Jean, France, and ends in Santiago, Spain. And so this is a pilgrimage that's been around for centuries. Kind of the legend has it that the St. James's tomb is in Santiago, and so for hundreds, if not thousands of years, people have been making the pilgrimage there to pay homage. people do it for different reasons, but the modern day Camino is kind of like a spiritual, it's a pilgrimage, it's a spiritual journey. A lot of people go on the Camino if, when they're between jobs, maybe they just got divorced, maybe they just lost someone close to them, and they kind of need some time to go and just try to connect and get closer to God. And so my team and I knew we were going to be going to Spain, and so this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to hike the Camino. My squad walked roughly 275 miles from Pamplona, Spain to Santiago, minus a few little sections we bussed in the middle. But because of my previously mentioned blisters, nearly all 21 days of our walk, which was more of a hike, most of those days were miserable for me. It was a true physical and emotional test of endurance. Our goal for our time on the Camino was to journey alongside these other people, peregrinos, pilgrims or peregrinos in Spanish, to connect and encourage, to build relationships in hopes of sharing our faith stories with people. But after about a week, I was feeling so discouraged. I couldn't walk fast, I couldn't keep up with people, and I was having a hard time starting conversations just with my teammates to tell them how miserable I was, let alone talk about my faith. So every day, I was the last one on my team to roll into town. We were walking upwards somewhere between 15 and 20 miles every day. We'd pick like a little town on the map and say, this is where we're meeting, and it was like, get there or don't get there. And so I would be hobbling into town like way later than everybody else. And I didn't feel like I was connecting with anyone, and even with my team I was struggling. So how was I supposed to share hope? How was I supposed to, bring light to these people when I was feeling pretty hopeless myself? But one night, like I said, about a week in, during our evening Bible study with my team, we were reflecting on our misery. which was somewhat shared, and found ourselves talking about the various people who had supplied us along the way so far with Band-Aids, tips on how to drain your blisters so that they heal faster, and there was tons of people along the trail who were suffering from things much worse than blisters, heartaches and suffering from all kinds of different things. And it quickly dawned on us that clearly our relationships so far in the Camino had come about because of our sufferings and our need and our poor planning, maybe. And God is funny like that sometimes, and he works through us and in us even when we don't know it. I know he was working through the countless people who supplied me with blister tape, that's for sure. There was one lady in particular, her name was Grace, and she really was my saving grace on the Camino because she, that's not Grace, but that's okay. She, just gave supplies to me endlessly. I'm pretty sure she kept saying like, oh yeah, I have extra, but she just always had more extra, so I think she was going out and buying them for me, which was so sweet. But yeah, after all of that misery, I think I'm still somewhat grateful for those crummy shoes that I had because of the people I met along the way. And this is a picture of me in front of the very anticlimactic Santiago de Compostela that was under construction. But our pilgrim's passports is what I'm holding, and at each hostel or albergue is what they were called. Along the way we would get a stamp, and you could get a stamp at cafes or going into the beautiful cathedrals in all the little towns along the way. You got a different stamp, and so it's one of my most treasured keepsakes from the trip because I obviously couldn't carry too many souvenirs in my pack because it was already way too big. So I suppose in my time up here trying to figure out where to start and what approach to take in telling you about my year, it turns out I actually have shared quite a few stories and lessons already. I think ministry can be like that sometimes, regardless of where we are. We tend to spend a lot more time planning and hypothesizing, researching, what's the best way to do things, how can we be the most effective, and we get stuck before we even get to the doing. I learned that lesson in logistics this year, like I talked about. You can make plans upon plans about what route to take, but sometimes you just get stuck in traffic. Whether you're literally on the back of a moped in Thailand or stuck waiting for your applications to process at the Chinese embassy, or here back at home, you might be waiting in line at the grocery store in Crosby and Brainerd, it's just around the corner. Look around at the people near to you. Start to look at everyone as people who are unreached, just like the people in the 1040 window, like the Mongolians. Start to look at setbacks, even the minor ones like blisters, as opportunities to tell people about Jesus. And last but not least, remember that love is a universal language, the language of our Creator. And I had to travel all around the world for God to show me, but it really is as simple as who is next to you and who is God calling you to love today. Thanks, guys.